Good morning, everyone. So we apologize for the delay, but the loveliness of meetings in the modern age when it comes to incorporating the digital element can always lead to some particular peculiarities. So I'm Eli Loftus. I'm from Okanagan CD. And so thank you all for joining us here today for the forestry and agroforestry track. Very happy to be able to present our first speaker of the day, Dr. Molly Dar. She gets her technical setup here before I hand it off. Molly is a recently joined WSU Agriculture and Natural Resources NAR Extension Program Unit as the Forest Health Extension Specialist. Dr. Dar specializes in forest and tree health with a concentration of forest entomology and integrated pest management techniques. Dr. Dar serves Whatcom, Clallam, Kitsap, and Jefferson counties while maintaining a statewide program on behalf of WSU's Connors. Her forestry extension program uses various forms of communication, including social media, webinars, popular and peer-reviewed publications, in-person visits, and workshops to help educate stakeholders about forest health, invasive species, and forest management in Washington. She also co-leads the Washington chapter of Women Owning Woodlands, an education network aimed at connecting women forest landowners with the resources and skills they need to manage their own forests. Well, with that, very happy to welcome Dr. Dar here today, and when you're ready.
Thank you so much. I think we're in business now.
All
right. And I'm going to keep my camera off too, just because I'm having weird bandwidth issues over here. Is that full screen yet?
We're full screen now.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you guys so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to present to this group. I'm going to just run through a review of native and invasive forest pest insects that you may run across in Washington. And I'm also going to give a brief update at the end of where we stand with some novel invasive pest insect species, and also some species that didn't used to be a problem, but may become an issue with timber producers as we experience warming temperatures and more droughts. Okay, so I'm just going to get right into it here. So before we get into the insects, I wanted to talk about what a healthy forest looks like. So that's a pretty broad topic, and we all know that Washington is an ecologically rich and diverse environment. So in general, a healthy forest has the ability to sustain a unique species composition and the processes that exist within it. So this is important for the survival and plants and animals, to the maintenance of a healthy environment and its processes, and to accommodate present and future needs of people. So this also looks like timber resources, recreational access, wildlife management, ecological conservation, all those kinds of objectives. Maintaining forest health through monitoring and management of forest pests, plants, and diseases can impact a bunch of different factors. So a healthy forest can mean smaller and less intense wildfires, increased forest resilience to pests, drought, and diseases, greater mitigation against climate change, and water supply protection. And it also promotes a healthy populations of plants and animals and is essential in preventing extinction. So forest and tree health decline does not happen all at once, and there are so many things that can impact the health of a forest or a tree. Usually it is not just one thing. So you can see on this diagram, I don't know where my animations went. On the left side of the diagram, you can see the biotic factors. These are all living things. And on the right side of the tree, these are the abiotic factors, which are non-living factors that can influence an environment like temperature, storm damage, mechanical damage, and so forth. This is to illustrate that there might not be a single event that causes the death of a tree or a forest, but a single factor can stress out a tree enough that they're predisposed to death if other stressors come along. You're going to see a lot of examples about this, especially when we get into the bark beetles later on. So Mannion's spiral, I bet a lot of you are familiar with this diagram. This shows the process of diminishing forest health. Forest and tree health decline is caused by interchangeable predisposing, inciting, and contributing factors. Predisposing factors are factors like climate, site selection, genetic potential, and age, which can reduce the potential for trees to withstand injury or biotic attack. Predisposing factors also include suppression and competition, which are often a result of invasive plant species taking over an ecological niche. Inciting factors are usually events like drought or defoliation, rather than chronic conditions. They result in the first symptoms in decline and reduce the tree's ability to tolerate adversity. In other words, trees get stressed and can't fight off pests and diseases as easily. The contributing factors include anything that we just discussed, plus a variety of pests and pathogens that create or contribute to decline once they're incited. So these include damage and disease brought on by a wide variety of secondary pests and pathogens, and those are all the things that we're going to discuss here. So usually forest insect pests are an example of a biotic inciting or contributing factor. Often insect pests are a secondary issue, meaning that they won't kill a tree alone, but make a forest unhealthy, but they may cause significant damage if a tree is already stressed by drought, flooding, age, or other predisposing factors. Forest insects and diseases kill more trees and claim more timber in the US each year than any other forest stress agent. They can cause significant growth loss, degrade timber, make trees vulnerable to attack by secondary insects and diseases, spread tree pathogens, and can be a serious nuisance. So this isn't just the loss of trees to mortality, but it's also the loss of productivity in terms of lumber. So if you're interested in harvesting your forest at some point, forest insect pests are something that you're going to definitely want to be aware of. So what makes a pest? Why, insects, they're just out there living their life, doing their thing. So a pest can generally be defined as any organism whose biology, behavior, or location places it in direct conflict with humans. So insects that threaten human health, destroy food, damage structures or landscapes, cause general annoyance or anxiety, that's why they are considered pests. So this means that whether an insect is considered a pest is entirely subjective. It depends on the person, the situation, the objectives of the landowner. One person can completely freak out when they see a spider and want to kill it immediately. Another person can understand that it's, not harmful in any way and can maintain the balance, an important part of the ecology of their surrounding area. Also, as an entomologist, I like to stress at the top of this that most insects are good. 95% of the insects that we see in forests are absolutely necessary. They're not pests, and they make the forests what they are. Most insects do not feed on trees, do not cause serious harm, because native trees in Washington have evolved along with these insects. They're tolerant of their feeding under normal circumstances. And many insects play important roles in the forest ecosystem, including pollination, nutrient cycling, and soil health, decomposition, and they're also an important food source for many animals. They're also very beneficial for keeping other pest populations down. We're definitely going to touch on that in a little bit too. So when you're managing your forest, it's important to keep an eye out for the pests that can damage your trees. And we're going to talk about the less than 5% that can do just that. So first, we're going to talk about native pests, most of which fall under the group secondary pests, meaning they can't kill a healthy tree on their own. It's got to be weak or stressed for them to overcome it. All right, so I'm going to spend a little more time on bark beetles because of the significance that they have in Western forests. Bark beetles can be both good and bad for our forests in Washington. They are native decomposers, pollinators, and food for wildlife, but they can also cause tree mortality, which is exacerbated by climate change. So in general, bark beetles attack conifers that are stressed. So if you see a bark beetle attacking a tree, usually that's a signal that there's something else going on within the tree that's already making it stressed out. So the best thing to do when you see a tree being attacked by a bark beetle is to see what weakened the tree to this attack in the first place. Maybe it was a lightning strike, or maybe it was like mechanical damage from a pre-commercial thin. Has it been an especially dry year and drought is stressing these trees out already? So because of this, one of the best management approaches is to try to maintain tree health as best you can to avoid bark beetle attack in the first place. So as bark beetles attack the tree, they feed under the bark and they create their galleries. And you can see these in the lower images right here. The adults create the egg galleries, which are the thicker center columns there. And then you can see all of the young beetle larvae radiate off of those galleries and the surrounding lines that you can see sort of branching off the central column. This feeding action girdles the tree from the inside and prevents it from taking up nutrients and water. So the cool thing is you can often identify which bark beetle species is attacking the tree by the shape of the gallery. You can see that the galleries from the Douglas fir beetle look different from the galleries from the Douglas fir pole beetle and even the Douglas fir engraver beetle. So if you ever call a naturalist or you know, a DNR folks or arborists out and you want to know exactly what beetle you're looking at, it can be really difficult to tell because they're all so tiny and they look really similar. But if you remove a sheet of bark from the external layer, the galleries can be a dead giveaway. All right, so like I said, the bark beetles are all hard-bodied cylindrical adults that are brownish black in color. They're 1 to 9 millimeters long with clubbed antennae. And all the larvae are these small white grubs. They all look really similar to each other. So you want to look at gallery and host tree species to identify likely what beetle you're dealing with. Attacking beetles bore under the bark. That's where they mate. That's where they lay their eggs. And then that's also the eggs hatch. The larvae feed. You can see that there. And then they later emerge from the tree and the adults fly, mate, and the cycle continues. So it is the gallery construction and the feeding on the inner bark of the trunks that kills the trees. Damaged trees, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, fade to a deep reddish brown color. And during attacks, the reddish or yellowish boring dust, also known as frass, so that is another name for insect poop, also accumulates in the folds of the bark under the base of the tree. So if you see a lot of this sawdust stuff that's mounting up, that's a really good sign that you've got bark beetle infestation. Clear streamers of pitch or sap may also run down the bark of trees under attack. Douglas fir beetle outbreaks usually occur in areas of wind-thrown trees or at sites damaged by fire or defoliation by other insect species. So in other words, if you've had a massive tree kill event or a massive event where trees are already weakened for probably one of those abiotic factors, then the trees release chemicals that alerts these Douglas fir beetles that there's some really good food that they can exploit, and then they travel to these pockets, and that's how you get these bark beetle infestations on a pretty big scale. Usually one-off, if it's just, you know, one tree that has them, it's not really something that you need to manage or worry about. So I really want to emphasize that the best management is to promote stand vigor. So just making sure that your stand is as healthy as possible. So to do that initially, you want to focus on thinning and maintaining a proper density of your forest. Also, if you are capable and you have the means, prompt removal of wind-thrown, severely damaged trees or trees damaged by other stand disturbances is also recommended. Like I said, down trees release certain chemical properties that attract the beetles in. So if you remove those, then that's a good way not to attract the beetles to your recently damaged stand. Attacks are most severe in unmanaged stands or trees that are largest in diameter and in also extremely dense stands. Also, if direct control is needed in high-value trees, trees can be protected using the anti-aggregation pheromone, abbreviated as MCH, and that disrupts this beetle communication pattern where they communicate through scenting. So it kind of, you put out a different scent that confuses the beetle and that disorients them. It works really well, and it's not as persistent, not as harmful as some certain insecticides can be to the environment. Secondary bark beetles include Douglas fir pole beetle, Douglas fir engraver beetle, and another unnamed engraver beetle. It's a Scolitis species. These are also secondary to other stressors, including primary pests. So the Douglas fir beetle is often a primary pest. These guys often come in after the Douglas fir beetle has already established populations. So you can have multiple beetle species in a stand or in a tree at once, depending on how gaunt the damage is. So these beetles usually cause mortality in smaller trees. They can top kill or branch kill larger trees. They also commonly attack small diameter and thin bark portions of logging slash. So this is a great reason to remove the slash piles if you do think that you have a beetle problem. Now, it's tough when you talk to scientists or foresters. These piles can be a common source of contention because they're really great for habitat. They have a lot of really good uses. They can release nutrients back into the soil if you just leave them undisturbed. But the only downside is if you already have beetles in the area, they can attract more. So it's really is a case-by-case basis whether you want to maintain slash piles in your forest. So these beetles are usually not a problem on their own. They actually act as thinning agents of weakened, suppressed, or diseased trees, so they can really help with forest health. But if they're coupled with Douglas fir pole beetles under stress, then you can really damage a stand. So again, enhancing the stand and tree quality will help prevent these attacks. So I want to just touch on wood borers very quickly, because they're very common in the Pacific Northwest. I bet a lot of you have seen these guys in the summertime. I want to talk about these for two reasons. One, because they look really similar to emerald ash borer, which you've likely seen in the news, as recently coming into Oregon and now British Columbia. So I want to show you how to identify them and what the difference is. And I also just want to touch on this because I get a lot of landowner questions about specifically the Western cedar borer and the golden buprestid beetle, because they're really, they stand out. Often people see them on their porches, but you really don't have to worry about them. They don't damage your Western cedars. Like it's really ineffectual what they do. They will feed on it, but they're native. And so the tree has sort of evolved to coexist with them, and they don't cause a ton of damage. So the golden buprestid beetle primarily attacks Douglas fir and ponderosa pine, can also be found in spruces and true firs. They're about a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch long. And again, they're not usually associated with tree mortality. Larval feeding can cause structural damage, and emerging adults can damage finished wood surfaces and buildings. So that's where I get landowner complaints a lot, is when they're boring into their porches, and they see the boring holes and they're just like, what the heck is this thing? Is this an emerald ash borer? So banded alder borer is another one I wanted to touch on. This is a type of longhorn beetle. Its body is typically long and cylindrical, and the antennae are at least half the length of the body. I do see these a lot in the summertime as well. Keep an eye out. They're usually an inch to an inch and a half long, and they will attack already dead branches on alder, maple, ash, oak, willow, and other hardwood tree species. So they don't kill trees either. They bore into sticks and branches that are already dead. The other reason I wanted to bring this one up is just because it looks a lot like the damaging exotic pest, the Asian longhorn beetle. This is not yet known to be established in Washington, but it has been known to arrive in shipping containers and shipping materials. And as you know, we're surrounded by ports, so we're not necessarily safe from it coming in. We think that that's how the emerald ash borer appeared too out here. So if you look at the Asian longhorn beetle, it has a lot of blue markings. It's like, and it isn't banded. So the banded alder borer has these stripes. This guy is spotty, it's a lot darker, and then you can look for its telltale blue feet, and its antennae are much longer too. So if you see those and any other exotic insect pests, which I will be getting into, go ahead and call up your local USDA station and report it. A lot of these things are detected from citizens on the ground that may have otherwise gone undetected, and can be really amazing success stories that I'll touch on shortly if people are able to communicate what they see. I'm going to move along because I know we don't have a lot of time here. Yeah, I want to get into defoliators. So I bet a ton of you have seen lately the Western tent caterpillars. They're the ones that are scattered throughout the shrubs and trees, usually closer to the ground. They kind of like wave their bodies around in this synchronized dance to threaten passersby. So they're really eye-catching. And I get a lot of calls about these too. That's a type of defoliator that's really common in this area. However, most defoliators that you run across really will not kill trees. You have to look at like years and years of repeated heavy defoliation to really kill a tree at all. Mostly it's just going to be aesthetic damage, which is really important to know because I think people get really spray happy and they get super excited to manage something that doesn't necessarily need to be managed. So it's just a good way to save time and money just by understanding that it's sort of part of the cyclical nature, and they're really not something that you need to worry about. Yes, however, defoliators, like other native pests that we've discussed, can stress a tree or predispose it to other pests, but they're also almost always secondary pests, and rarely kill trees. So other common ones include western spruce budworm. This one can be a problem. I've definitely seen some pockets in Alaska where there's been recent forest fires or wind throw where spruce budworm has really dominated the area. That is an exception. So if you do get some sort of massive tree kill event, just like bark beetles, these budworms can become an issue, and spongy moth as well. But other ones, common ones that aren't really an issue, as so far as I've seen, are western hemlock looper, the forest tent caterpillar that I described, Pacific tent caterpillar, and western tent caterpillar. Okay, so I just talked about them. Okay, so western spruce budworms, hosts include Douglas fir, true firs, Engelmann spruce, and the western larch. During outbreaks, larvae might also feed on foliage of non-host understory trees like pines as well. They mostly feed on current year foliage, and that's why they can kill trees, is because they can cause growth loss. And then chronic defoliation of over 4 years may cause top kill mortality. Young trees are especially vulnerable and they may be heavily impacted. And this weakened state can also increase susceptibility to bark beetle infestation. So if you think about that Mannion spiral, one factor can lead to the next, and often tree death is a result of multiple factors attacking them at once. Almost always. So when managing forest stands for western spruce budworm, it's important to selectively thin to increase spacing between hosts and favor even age stands. I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but the best way to protect your forest is by maintaining tree and forest health from the get-go. Okay, so now we're going to get into the fun stuff, non-native invasive pests, or exotic pests that have been introduced into the United States. I bet a lot of you are familiar with this graphic as well. It just kind of shows the importance of nipping infestations in the bud. So non-native pests are an increasing problem in the United States and all over the world. Monitoring and preventative management are your best tools. Just like with invasive plant species, when outbreaks occur, they often are difficult or impossible to control once they get to a certain level. Proper forest management, early detection of infestations, and practices that promote predatory populations are key. So get to know the invasive species in your area so you can be on the lookout, and you can help your friends and family understand which species should be reported and which ones are an issue and which ones are just important native species that you shouldn't bother and you shouldn't need to worry about. So a great way to be on the lookout is just by regularly scouting your land. Again, if you have land and you have the time and means, just walking through it and getting to know what your normal healthy forest looks like and what kind of things might be out of place. If you regularly scout your land for common invasive species, you're more likely to detect them at a point where prevention and eradication is still possible. And because invasive species are so prolific, because they don't have any natural native enemies here, waiting until they're established to begin control measures will likely mean you won't be able to get rid of the population, and controlling the spread will be exponentially more difficult. I grew up and got my education on the East Coast, so I definitely witnessed firsthand the devastation that emerald ash borer caused, which I'll get into now, along with damages from Asian longhorn beetle and all different types of bark beetles. Hemlock woolly adelgid was what I studied in my PhD, and it just ruined, a keystone species all up and down the East Coast. So what's encouraging about the emerald ash borer detection out here in Washington is that folks have been all over it. So it was first detected okay, let me back up. I'm skipping around. So the emerald ash borer, it's a destructive invasive insect. It was accidentally introduced to the Midwest in the 1990s. Since then, it has spread and devastated ash tree populations in the Midwestern and Eastern United States. And I really mean like decimated them. So a lot of times ash trees were planted as a monoculture through neighborhoods. And so it was really easy for this beetle to just kind of like mow down this buffet of trees. So what were once green neighborhoods are now, they had to be replaced. All the trees had to be replaced. So in June 2022, it was found infesting ash in Northwest Oregon near the Washington border. So here in Washington and Oregon, emerald ash borer will kill native and ornamental ash trees if left unchecked, significantly impacting both natural ecosystems and urban and community forests. In urban areas, killed ash trees will be unsightly, and they also may result in hazardous situations and will increase landscaping costs. Emerald ash borer also exclusively attacks ash trees. It's native to Northeast Asia, where ash trees have co-evolved to develop resistance. Out here, we have the Oregon ash, Fraxinus latifolia, and it is an important riparian species that help maintain tree health, stream health, keeps stream temperatures low, and is also it's another one of those keystone species that sort of impacts like a whole trophic cascade of different native species. So Oregon ash is the only ash tree native to Washington and Oregon, and it's also so yeah, it's super ecologically important. That's why, and it's an important cultural resource as well. So that's why we want to really try and keep these guys contained. Just like the bark beetles that I described earlier, they feed on the leaves in the canopy. The adults feed on the leaves in the canopy, and the larvae feed on the phloem, which girdles and kills the tree. So it's the same situation as the native bark beetles that we were talking about earlier, but because emerald ash borer are invasive, their populations grow out of control without their native predator populations to keep them in check. In fact, the places that emerald ash borer has invested on the East Coast have seen over 95% ash mortality. That's over 100 million trees that have been killed in 30 plus states since the 1990s. So here you can see their larval galleries are S-shaped. It's sort of like generous interpretation, but you can see how they're different from the native boring beetles that I showed earlier. This is a great way to determine if you have emerald ash borer, if you suspect that you have an emerald ash borer issue. They also have these signature D-shaped exit holes. You can see they're poking their little heads out of. Those are often higher up in the tree though, so they can be kind of hard to see. But if you do see both of these things in your tree, it's a really good sign that you probably have an emerald ash borer problem. Other signs to look out for, especially now that we're really trying to keep this pest contained, are thinning or yellowing crowns of the trees, sprouts growing from the lower trunk and roots, and something called blonding, which is this woodpecker damage. It really can really shine out like a beacon in the forest because that bark can it just really stands out against the greenery. So unfortunately, you know, the birds go after the larvae. This does help with population control, but it's never enough to keep them completely at bay. But it's a good sign that there may be emerald ash borer in there if you see that sign on ash trees. So stopping the spread may be unrealistic in the East Coast, but using an integrated approach can slow the spread of emerald ash borer into new areas. So this can look like a lot of different things. Insecticide stem injections can protect high value trees. They're costly, but they're effective, and they need to be reapplied every 1 to 3 years. So this obviously doesn't make sense on a large scale in a forested setting, but can be really good if you're trying to protect your own trees or trees in you know, urban areas, parks and government buildings, things like that. Biological control agents like parasitic wasps have been released. They can help slow the spread of emerald ash borer. They're a great addition to chemical control for an IPM or integrated pest management approach. These guys have just been recently cleared to be released in Oregon and have been used in the Midwest for about 10 or 15 years now. They definitely help. But the thing that I really want to emphasize is human behavior can have a huge impact on emerald ash borer spread. You can remove and dispose of infested trees if emerald ash borer has been detected in your stand, but most importantly, do not move firewood across county or state lines. I'm always the buzzkill at campouts or like really harping my friends not to bring the wood with them. But if you look at the maps of how these invasive species spread, they jump from county to county. It isn't a continuous line usually, like as though they're traveling up between forest land. It is, isolated pockets pop up because people bring infested wood and they either leave it out or in burn piles or you know, build things with it without treating it. And that's really how new populations are established. So it's a really good idea to burn it where you buy it. Okay. All right. So one I wanted to tell you about is the spotted lanternfly, just to make sure that you guys know what it looks like, because again, it travels on shipping materials often, but it also can just kind of hunker down and travel on RVs and things like that. So it could show up in Washington. It's just good to know what it looks like. So it's native to Asia. It was first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014. And it's since been spotted in several mid-Atlantic states. Like many invasive species, it has no known natural enemies in the United States to keep the population under control. The nymphs are excellent jumpers, and the adults have these bright red spotted wings. Egg mass is protected under sticky cement substances, and they're easily transported on vehicles. So they're a potential pest of fruits, ornamental, woody trees, and vines. They're a big threat to the wine industry back east, and so that's definitely one reason why we're on high alert here in Oregon and Washington for them. It's not yet been found on the West Coast, but it's important to keep an eye out. So if you see that one, go ahead and report it to your local extension agent, your county extension agent, your USDA office, Forest Service, really any sort of forestry professional like that. They'll get you to the right person so someone can come out and identify it. Okay, so I really would be remiss if I didn't touch on the northern giant hornet. This total fiasco that happened really when we didn't need any more alarmist news, right in the heart of the pandemic. So other names that this one is known by is the Asian giant hornet. Its native range is in Japan, and the loose translation is "bee the size of a sparrow." The New York Times also dubbed it thoughtfully murder hornet, which was problematic and alarmist because they do not kill people, they kill bees. And it was really just a way to get headlines. So this was first detected in British Columbia in 2019. This is a really great success story, actually, of citizen scientists speaking up. And that was just, you know, a homeowner who called their local extension office and said, I found this crazy bee. I've never seen this before. What do I do? And so this nest that was found was eradicated. Later that year, a specimen was found in Washington. And so it's native to Asia, and it's a known pest to manage honeybees. It can kill a healthy honeybee hive in just a few hours. So this is a big problem for agriculture and for everyone because they're crucial pollinators for our food supply. It's also a predator of many other insect species. Most native pollinators, even more important than honeybees, like yellow jackets, wasps, and native pollinating bees. So that's why people really jumped at the chance to try and squash this thing before it got out of hand. They're easy to recognize. The closest thing we have to it in Washington is an aerial hornet, which I'll show you a picture in the next slide. They can be nearly 2 inches long, and the real distinguishing characters are the large yellow-orange head, which is disproportionately large compared to the rest of the body. Also, the last abdominal segment of this species is usually yellow, which is unique as well. Again, if you see this, turn it into the WSDA, let them know. So you'll most likely see them in the fall, although we're almost ready to say that they have been completely eradicated. They were not spotted at all in the last 2 years. The WSDA had a swift and effective response. One nest was eradicated in 2020, 3 more in 2021, and so far in 2022, 2023, and we're waiting to see this fall in 2024 if we still have another negative survey. After 3 years of negative surveys, the pest will be considered eradicated. So this is a really great success story of what can happen if we have a really mobilized, synchronized efforts on the ground that we can really nip this thing in the bud. And we're hoping we can do that with Emerald Ash Borer too. All right, let's see. I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on emerging pests of concern. These are non-native invasive species and species that are native to our area, but emerging as important pests because they seem to be damaging more host trees in areas where they hadn't in the past. These pests were covered beautifully earlier this year at the Urban Forest Pest Virtual Summit put on the Washington Invasive Species Council. And those recordings are available online. I have links that I can distribute later. I want to talk about first the velvet longhorn beetle. This is emerging generalist tree pest. This is a really concerning one because as we're undergoing a rapid global range expansion, which is facilitated by global trade and other human activities, it's native to Eastern and Central Eurasia. It has an incredibly broad range of species it will attack. This is why this one is pretty concerning, also because it's not particularly easy to identify. So it's over 40 genera of hosts have been documented. And they will attack weakened, diseased, or damaged trees, as well as healthy trees that can even reproduce in dried wood, including firewood and pruning slash. Their documented host list is vast. It includes apples and stone fruits, maples, oaks, walnuts, ashes, beeches, elms, hickories, willows, pines, firs, spruces, pretty much everything you can think of. Also, the identification is not definitive, but it should help you rule out other native longhorn beetles. So it's pretty cryptic, and how you can ID the beetle itself and the damage, it likely will blend into the background and go undetected. So this is one of those ones where we're kind of just gonna wait and see what happens. I think one thing you want to look out for is it prefers trunks and the larger branches of mature trees. It's also similar to many other native longhorn beetles in appearance. So look out for the rapid decline of otherwise vigorous trees. We're not yet aware of any distinguishing characteristics like the EAB or Asian longhorn beetle. So this recent screenshot from iNaturalist shows abundant pathways in a broad range of hosts. There's been a spike in detection in the Pacific Northwest over the last 2 years, which has been corroborated by the public. Again, I love seeing citizen science in action like this. This is all just boots on the ground kind of reports into iNaturalist. But it's been corroborated by the WSDA and ODA that populations are widely established and introductions are continuing through wooden products and products being shipped with wooden packaging materials. So basically, we definitely know it's here. We just don't yet know how much damage it's capable of or how far it can spread, since it's only a recently relevant species. So it's just one to keep an eye out for. Mediterranean oak borer is a new event. This is a non-native ambrosia beetle. It wasn't on anyone's radar and it kind of came out of nowhere. So there's not a lot known right now about how to manage other than how we have tackled other invasive ambrosia beetles elsewhere in the country. Um, so ambrosia beetles are closely related to bark beetles and they look really similar too. However, bark beetles only feed on the phloem and the cambium layer, whereas ambrosia beetles bore straight through the bark and right into the sapwood, and they carry fungi with them and they inoculate the sapwood with the fungus. And then they feed on the fungus inside the sapwood. So they're also known as fungus farmers. So it's really not the insect itself that kills the tree, but often it's the fungus that they bring along with it that that pathogen kills the tree itself. So there are a ton of native ambrosia beetles around, and the Mediterranean oak borers are going to be indistinguishable from these native species. Again, they're super small. You can see in that picture compared to the mechanical pencil tip, and will need to be detected by their damage, their frass, and their galleries. So they're native to Europe, West Asia, and North Africa. And the fungus that they vector causes a wilt disease that leads to the decline in tree and death in trees. It also appears that it's on the move and it's quite prolific, with 2 or more generations per year. All right, so the damage looks similar to, say, emerald ash borer. We got that same signature crown dieback symptoms in a top-down pattern from fungal infection. It starts in one portion of the crown, and the dieback will move downward to the next branch fork, eventually girdling and killing the tree in 3 to 5 years. Crown dieback obviously can be the result of a lot of different stressors, so you'll want to focus on the frass, which you can see in this bottom left-hand corner, that is white and powdery, and black stained galleries that are only in the sapwood, which you can see in this photo here. That's a unique characteristic of this species. You also want to look for both because white frass is a characteristic of many native ambrosia beetles, and the only definitive way to determine if it is MOB is sample analysis. So again, movement of untreated oak wood is the pathway for spread. You really don't want to move this wood across county or state lines. Hosts are valley oak, blue oak, possibly black oak in California, and unfortunately Oregon white oak. And they prefer to attack oaks already suffering from drought or disease stress, which is all of them lately, due to, I don't know, we just have a lot of drought in this area and it's sort of expected to only get worse with climate change. It was recently confirmed in Oregon white oak in Troutdale and Wilsonville, Oregon, and seems to be spreading quickly. So if you see white frass on a dying oak, make sure you report it. Another important one to keep an eye out for is this California five-spined ips. That's been in the news a lot lately in my neck of the woods. So ips beetles are a genus of bark beetles. They tend to infest slash. So, you know, another good reason why some people may tell you to get rid of your slash piles if you're in an area that has already been attacked by ips, California five-spined ips beetles. They can infest many pine species, including ponderosa pine, western white pine, lodgepole pine, and others. Until 2010, this beetle was not known to exist above the Oregon border, but by 2018, they'd located it throughout Washington as well. So its range is clearly expanding. It's probably due to climate change and hotter temperatures and drier summers creating more tree stress, so it's making more trees vulnerable to this insect. Last summer, there were dead trees reported in Renton and Bothell, and the California five-spined ips beetles were found in those trees. So we need to keep an eye out now because it's likely going to become an issue, especially for pine management on the west side of the Cascades. So that's going to be an issue for timber producers on the west side where they didn't ordinarily have to worry about this bark beetle. They could have to now. So a good way to look for it is red frass accumulates from adult beetles maintaining inside galleries. It's a telltale sign. Also, you'll notice needle discoloration to orange to reddish brown, like you see in that center picture. That's a little bit grainy, I'm sorry. Top killed stems will also be visible. Healthy stands can tolerate California five-spine ips beetles under normal conditions. So try to keep your stands as healthy as possible. Thin trees properly. Time/management treatment to avoid times when the beetle is feeding and breeding. So time/treatment not to occur between March and July if you can. Reoccupying a historic range or moving northward, we don't know because this is actually a native beetle. We don't know why it's suddenly on the move, but you know, like I said, we have theories. So be aware this pest is becoming more of an issue with frequent drought. I think I'm just going to give you guys one more, and then I'm going to skip to the resources slide at the end so you know some common good resources that you can use to identify a lot of these things yourself and also share them with friends and family. And I will be sure to send a follow-up email to Eli so you can have all of those links on hand as well as some more that I found that I didn't quite make it to this presentation. All right, this one actually has been an issue. I've noticed it in Wenatchee, where I used to live. It's the bronze birch borer. So it's native to North America, and it's an emerging pest because there's been an increase in plantings of landscape and ornamental birch for many years. I don't know. I think you guys are in Leavenworth right now, right? I think.
Right.
So when I used to work at the Tree Fruit Center out in Wenatchee, and there were all of those gorgeous weeping ornamental birches all over the place, and I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly why, because birch is typically a riparian tree. And it can be stressed out if it's in a landscape that's too dry. And so we have a lot of those. So this guy is mostly a secondary pest where you'll remember means attacks the trees that are already damaged or stressed. Birch prefer cool, moist growing conditions. So anything that's planted off site is going to be stressed. The larvae feed on the phloem and cambium and serpentine galleries. Repeated attacks lead to crown death, sparse chlorotic leaves, dieback. Healthy trees can survive attacks. And they're very easy to spot on white birch. This is actually what I saw. So you can see these squiggly galleries right underneath the bark, which is kind of cool. So let's see, it causes this swelling pattern under the bark. So management, again, increase tree vigor in the landscape setting. Make sure you plant these things on site. Manage for other pests like aphids, avoid injury, root damage, soil compactions, things like that. If you do see a tree, it's best to remove and dispose of heavily infested trees. Pesticides can also be used for high value trees and should focus on preventing attacks. You're not likely to save a heavily infested tree. The last one is winter moth. This has not been that much of an issue in your area, so I'm just going to skip to the resources, and then I don't know, doesn't really look like we have time for questions, but
We do, we have a little bit of time for questions.
okay, great.
Yeah. So that first of all,
Let me
a round of applause for Dr. Dar.
I'm sorry, I can't really hear you that well, Eli.
Yeah. Say again. We didn't hear you very well.
Okay.
Molly,
I can kind of hear you. It's really faint.
oh, it's probably it's the owl. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, well, thank you, Molly. Real quick before we turn it over to folks in the room, do any of our folks online have questions before we hand it off to folks in the room? Hearing and seeing none, let's see. Questions for Dr. Dar? Let's see.
Just because I recently came from Colorado, mountain pine beetle is on the mind, especially with climate change. Is there a sort of projection of increased infestation of mountain pine beetle in the Northwest? Is that a concern that we should be looking for in the future?
Eli, do you mind repeating the gist of that?
Yeah, so the question is there a potential or projection for an increased infestation of mountain pine beetle
Right.
in Washington?
Yes, yeah, it's certainly something that you want to keep an eye out for. It's been sort of something that's just been on our radar. I personally have not seen any issues in person. I think because the tree vigor is good enough up here where it really only occurs sporadically and remains undetected. However, in the future, if we do have a big wind throw event or a big fire that comes through, that's really when the populations are likely to explode. So that's really when, yeah, it's going to become more of an issue. But I've been called out to a few properties where landowners think they have it and it really wasn't detected, or it's like it had been there 3 years ago, but it didn't impact their forest or trees at all. So I would say it's not really something to worry about at this time.
Any other questions? Well, look at that with, oh, yes, sir.
We try to, so in terms of like fires.
And if you could speak up just a little bit for.
I'm sorry.
And like chipping programs like that, they're like a window that works best. Throughout the year,
And so Molly, the question is there a window for for activities like chipping and things like that that is appropriate for dealing with Ips beetles and things like that?
Good question. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I really think if you can do it in the nasty winter months is really going to be the good time. So typically they're flying in June, July, August, like around that time. So if you can do it before that, that's really the time that you want to focus on it. Yeah. Breeding can start as early as May, although that varies year to year depending on temperature and wetness. But yeah, if you can kind of do it off season, that's definitely recommended. That's a great question.
Actually, to follow that up for myself here, one thing in North Central Washington that I have cooperators asking about is how strong is the potential for chipping to actually act as an attractant to pine beetles? I've had property owner agree to that concern in terms of if I'm broadcasting chips out, is that just going to bring them in? And just kind of, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question too. You know what? I think I'd like to look into that a little bit more and not speak off the cuff, because most scenarios that I know, people move the chips away from their forest and use it as like landscaping. And so I don't know about like chipping it and then just keeping it in the forest. I don't have an answer for that. So let me email you after I talk to some local colleagues and see if they have any experience directly. It's a good question.
Excellent. But with that, I think we'll be moving on. Let's give one more hand for Molly.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you having me on. Sorry for all the issues up top.
Oh, that was all our fault.
On my end too. No, it's
yeah. Thank you all. We'll move on here to our next presenter. Stacey, go on.